My name is Adriano Vinca. I am a research assistant at the IASA and also a PhD student at the University of Victoria in Canada. And now I'm going to show a slightly more technical presentation about an open platform for optimizing energy, water, and land system transformation towards sustainable development, in particular the case of the Indus River Basin. And to this work collaborated my colleagues Simon Parkinson, Edward Byers, Muhammad Awais, but also many other colleagues from other institutes, not only at IASA. First of all, to understand what contributed to our model development, since we started with a case study on the Indus River Basin, we just give an overview of what are the basin's characteristics and main challenges for the future. So the Indus River Basin is located in South Asia, and he's home of about 250 million people, mostly in Pakistan, India, but also including Afghanistan, in particular the Kabul area, and a small portion of mountain China. And population growth rate is particularly high. So in the coming decades, population is expected to increase significantly. About 50% of the basin area is covered by glaciers, which contribute to a high inflow of fresh water, but it's also highly vulnerable to climate change in the coming decades. And the most of the economy is mostly agriculture, which is also contributing for about 95% of water withdrawals. In fact, the region is hosting a very old and complex irrigation system. As you can see from this map, it's showing the irrigated areas in the basin. And this complexity poses challenging in modernizing the irrigation system and improving efficiency, which is also already posing challenges of water availability, in particular groundwater depletion and water storage. With the consequences that very little flows of water are reaching the sea and then the downstream regions of the basin, causing dry out, especially in the dry seasons. Combined to this, there's also lack of water distribution, connection, and treatment and wastewater recycling, which could actually help improving water availability in urban areas. And then considering other sectors, food self-dependencies is also an issue related to food production, with the addition of air pollution, both related to crop burning, but also related to coal energy production. And here we move to the energy system. So electricity generation can be unreliable, in particular in the rural areas, while hydropower could play a significant role to solve these reliability issues, but also hydropower is critical also in managing regulating flows to avoid floods, but also providing water to agriculture and also electricity generation. So it's a very multi-sectoral critical technologies. More information on the basin are available on a perspective written by Yoshihide Wada, and also the work that probably my colleague Edward Byers is presenting after me is highlighting the importance of climate change impact on this region across multiple sectors, and shows how this region is already has a very high vulnerability index across different indicators in water, energy, and land, and this is likely to increase when global warming is increasing. And to all these challenges also adds the critical and difficult relationship between countries that are in the basins. And in order to strike a balance between these objectives that can be related to sustainable development goals in water, in the food and energy and climate sectors, we also need to balance what can be critical aspects between countries, and in particular transboundary agreements. And therefore we seek of striking a balance in between objective and challenges, and to assess costs and social environmental implications. So the approach we do in modeling is very similar to what also other studies have been doing, and falls within the water, energy, and land nexus modeling branch of research. And some other examples in the literature are, for instance, at the regional or country level, the CLUES models, which combine interlinkages between sector and match those with Sustainable Development Goal objectives, but also works at the global level, such as Message GLOBIOM or GCAM, have also demonstrated clear advantages of this type of approach in capturing nexus interaction. But also on the other side, it has been highlighted the high uncertainty due to the linkages of multiple models and also use of a higher amount of data compared to single sector studies. What we also try to value in our work is providing a model and tools which are open source, and I will get to this aspect also later. So in our work, we developed the so-called Nexus Solution Tools, which is a river basin scale modeling platform to study long-term pathways towards sustainable development. And linking to what Piotr just presented, the processing of developing the model has been carried together with our stakeholders in a number of meetings in 2018 and 2019. Together, also using these experimental games, we have identified challenges, collected regional data, and created together possible future pathways and future scenarios. And also 1 year later, once we have developed the model, we have presented results and checked checked for feedbacks from our stakeholders. So getting more into the details, the Nexus Solution Tools is actually linking two models that have been developed at DIASA. One is the community water model, a distributed hydrological model that is simulating the long-term interaction between climate and the water cycle, is capable to estimate surface and groundwater availability, given water demands at urban, rural, and industrial levels, and also irrigation water requirements, all under different assumptions for climate change impacts, for instance. And we link this to a infrastructure planning integrated assessment model that is Message IX, which is a model that across different sectors, so water, energy, and land, is modeling resource supply and demand, commodity balance, and is available to provide with infrastructure expansion planning and investments that minimize total system costs, but also meet external environmental constraints or policy constraints. And therefore, we use this model to assess economic and social environmental impacts of policies. The two models have different spatial and temporal resolutions. Therefore, for instance, the community water model has a 5 arc minutes spatial resolution and a daily temporal resolution. And we run that model connected to the Message IX, which has a more coarse resolution. We just use some sub-basins which are interconnecting administratory boundaries with hydrological sub-basins. And we also represent the river flow in a simplified way and the electricity network in a simplified way as a connection between different sub-regions. And for each region, we represent a detailed representation of water technologies, land, and energy technologies, as I will show later. And the two models are connected by upscaling some outputs for the hydrological model, such as potential evapotranspiration, effective precipitation, and runoff availability. And these are input into Message IX, which is then optimizing, minimizing total system costs and meeting external constraints, policy constraints, and provides with integrated solution in terms of investments, but also impacts on environment, for instance. It's also important to mention that the two models are fed with a synchronized geospatial database. So the two models are run with similar socioeconomic assumptions and also climate modeling assumptions. Therefore, the results are then consistent, and they are also aggregated in a results database that is then uploaded to a Explorer scenario explorer that also shares results from other modeling groups, such as the Zambezi models. More detail on the structure of different sectors that we include in the model. For instance, in the water system, we represent different sources of water: groundwater, seawater, and surface water that is linked between different regions, so different nodes. And also storage plays an important role in water management. And through to water distribution technologies such as pumping, desalination, or deviation, the water is allocated to meet exogenous demand, but also endogenous demand from other sectors, such as the energy and land sector. And then we also represent return flows and the possibility of treating water and recycling water according to different policy targets that we can set. And you can see from the different colors already what are the linkages between sectors. So for instance, electricity is required for water distribution, but also treatment. At the same time, the water availability determines hydroelectric potential. Focusing on the energy sector, we have a large number of power plants that might require or not water for cooling or for running hydropower, and also biomass. And this is connected through power transmission and distribution networks to meet electricity demand, which might be exogenously represented for urban and rural, or endogenous from other sectors. We also represent rural generation, so from small renewables or diesel or biomass generators, and then take also into account of CO2 emissions that impact climate or other pollutants emissions. Finally, in the land system, we represent 9 crops which are the most significant for the region. Can be irrigated crops with different irrigation technologies or rain-fed crops. And here also we link with energy and water requirements, and represent also irrigation losses to meet the crop products demand by country, and also having constraints due to the land availability. So we constrain that with land availability maps. And finally, crop residues can also be used, transformed, and converted in order to feed electricity power plants. And also in this case, we keep track of pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions. Concerning some data, of course, this model required a gathering of large amount of data. We prioritize, first of all, global databases so that we could then transfer ideally this model framework also to other regions. And for instance, we use high resolution spatial information for power generation and reservoirs, and also for transmission and road networks, as well as groundwater pumping capacity. Also for wind and power capacity factor, we had higher resolution capacity factor data that then gets aggregated at the sub unit levels that we use as a spatial resolution in our model. And this is the same also for other data such as land use maps and many others. While for other data such as, for instance, demands of water, electricity, we started from more aggregated data such as at the national level, and we downscale this information, this projection for the coming decades using population and GDP spatial information. And then for other type of more local data such as local regulation, such as the Indus Water Treaty or irrigation technologies, we gather local data and we work together also with local partners, in particular within LUMS, to provide specific information that are locally relevant to the model. As I mentioned before, we also value in particular the open accessibility of the tool, and here we did our best to make the tool open access. In particular, the 2 models which are based on are open source tools, accessible and documented online. Although, for instance, for message, the solver is not free but requires a license. And the NEST framework itself, it's also documented on this publication that came out this year. So feel free to read it or contact me for more information also on data. And there is a open repository on GitHub where the model can be downloaded and accessed. and also an interactive scenario explorer where results of some of our analysis are available. But also in terms of limitation, we have to be realistic and state the differences between availability and user-friendly. So we have to say that, for instance, the GitHub repository requires some expertise and programming skills in order to be able to actually understand and use the model, and might be not really user-friendly for a non-expert in the field. And also data required are, all the raw data were not possible to upload it there, but all the data available needed to run the model are actually on GitHub. So this makes the tool available and accessible for two types of audience: scientists who have also more programming skill and interested in using the model can actually go to the GitHub repository and learn from it, while policymakers more interested in interactive tools can actually look at the scenario explorer and browse different variables and different results. Now, I will just briefly give you an overview of what this model can be useful for, especially in the context of policy analysis. First of all, this is a more technical aspect. We also demonstrated the utility of the Nexus framework when studying, for instance, single policies related to water, climate, or food SDGs, and we compare the impact of assessing single policies and then using this tool assessing multiple policies simultaneously. And we actually noticed that we have different solutions. Here we are just showing, for instance, electricity production, and this different solution is more efficient and cost effective because it takes into account of the synergies between sectors, while studying single policies might neglect this aspect. Then other purposes for which the model can be used is the influence of technology-specific penetration targets on multi-sector development. And here we have an example from a study done from a colleague in LAMS that studied the targeting of increased smart irrigation penetration and shows the impact on reduced water withdrawals, but also increased total system cost and reduction in water distribution energy requirement, and also impacts on electricity system flexibility. Then one of our main studies and core research that we did in the ISWAL project, and also engaging with stakeholders, was the quantification of investments required for sustainable development goals in the region, and also the effects of cooperative and non-cooperative strategies across the basin countries. And here, first of all, we assess the challenges to water, energy, and land system in case of business as usual future, and we have estimates of how demands are likely to increase in the coming decades and how these might pose challenges in increased food costs, greenhouse gas emission, freshwater price, and also water stress and water scarcity. And we're also able to actually localize where the higher risk region are in the basins. In particular, would be downstream regions and the Punjab regions. Then we assess, we set in our model different targets in line with the Sustainable Development Goals across the energy, the water, and the land sector. And we see how achieving these Sustainable Development Goals might lead to a reduction and benefits in a large number of socio-environmental indicators, such as air pollutants, greenhouse gas emissions, but also irrigation surface and groundwater intensity, land pollutants, and access to water sanitation and river depletion. And then we also are able to assess what are the cost implications for the basins at the overall level to achieve these policies, but also breaking down into different countries and different sectors. And finally, we study what if we achieve these same sustainable development goals, we improved cooperation between countries, meaning increasing electricity trade, also a common food market, and optimal allocation of river flows, which sometimes might be some ideal assumptions, but it's important to study what might be the impacts of this. and the consequences. And we first of all find that this might lead to important cost reduction, but also substantial socio-environmental improvements. In particular, this figure is showing quite clearly, while the water scarcity is likely to increase significantly in a business as usual, considering the Sustainable Development Goals target might actually reduce water stress in the region, but considering a cooperation between countries brings additional benefits for the whole region in terms of water scarcity. And more information is available on this paper, which is actually coming up next week on nature sustainability. Finally, last but not least, the model can be also used to study the impact of reduced resource availability and alternative allocation schemes, and also identify feasible transformation pathways for achieving environmental objectives. And here we have an example of a study from our colleagues, Mohamed Awaid, who assessed the needs of setting environmental goals target in the downstream of the region, but also how this might have implication on the upstream regions and what are the marginal costs of achieving high ecological potentials. So I hope this was a clear overview of what the model is and what can be the purposes. Let me just mention that this project also led to several collaboration with young scientists who joined us in the summer 2019 and 2018 and worked with us. We had different meetings with stakeholders and training sessions and the game session, as Piotr already explained. And also the important thing is that some of these collaboration are not ending, but rather continuing. And we actually have collaboration with the Ministry of Environment in India on developing integrated model for analyzing the linkages in Indian water-land system and energy system. And also we have development of the Pakistani model also in collaboration with LUMS in Pakistan. So with this, I thank you for your attention and happy to take questions, if any. Here is just a list of useful material that you can look at if you are interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriano, for this presentation. So we're doing huge jumps, from the more qualitative to very quantitative, but we hope this is exactly the value of this project, that we are doing both, not just one. So I open the floor for questions. Please type them in the Q&A.
Sorry, Piotr, because I think there was one question raised in your presentation that I think it might be also relevant for Adriano to discuss about it, and had to do with how to overcome these data and information gaps. No, I mean, I think this is also quite a critical topic and problem in the modeling. So maybe you can reflect a little bit, Adriano, on how did you overcome those challenges, common challenges.
You mean gathering data across different sectors? And
yeah, the question was specifically what level of data and information gap you experience while working in remote areas, of this basin. So maybe particularly for the case your experience working in the Indus, and how did you manage to overcome those? What was your strategy or your approach?
Yeah. Thanks for your question. Yeah, for sure, as I explained, we had to use different approaches in data gathering, because sometimes we were able to directly feed from local analysis and surveys on data, but sometimes this was not possible, and therefore we had to refer to global database or to find new methodologies, for instance, using satellite data that look at figures and then try to downscale information where we don't have enough information that is coming from local sources. So as I say, we use different approaches. On one side, global database that actually informed already has at a high level of detail, and then local database or data source and data gathering done from colleagues or from us directly. For instance, we looked at every single hydropower plants in the region, and we check for projects that might be coming in the next decades, comparing that to the database we had in order to close uncertainty there. But in some other cases, we had to, for instance, come up with our solutions in order to fill the gaps. So one solution can be downscaling data using proxies from other data sources, such as population.
Thank you very much, Adriano. So we have the next question here from Abdul Karim. How are feedback loops modeled? I'm not sure if it's about feedback loops or food actually back loops. I think it's about food. For instance, price of water and of electricity affecting demands. In this regard, can the modeling framework be used to explore how demand side management can affect resource allocation?
So, for instance, in terms of food demand, there is not really we represent food demand exogenously, therefore there is not really a complete food market, but all the interaction between the sectors are endogenized in the model. Therefore, if there is a lack of water availability, the model will have different water prices in the different sub-regions, and this determines where the production might be cost optimal, and therefore we have changes in the food production location and technologies that can irrigate. So basically, the water prices affect both electricity generation and food production, but the demand that we have of food products and also electricity demand are exogenous in the model.
Okay, so some feedback loops included. I just got clarification just about feedbacks. So I just let this question to be answered verbally, audio. So if there is something to continue, Abdul Karim, please write the question again and we can continue in a typed way. And maybe, we are still a bit behind the schedule, but definitely we maybe should follow up with the next question from Abdul Karim. How are environmental flows represented? Are they scenarios of flow requirements for different target ecological state, or they are fixed values which needs to be met?
Yeah, exactly. We have different scenarios, and for each scenarios we set different level of targets, target flow, and in particular at the end of the river in the delta area. So as we saw in this slide, and for instance here we explore a scenario with low ecological, with low, let's say, minimal targets of environmental flows set in the last sub-region, and while we also assess scenarios in which these targets are set at a high level, and therefore we can explore what are the marginal costs of achieving such targets. Basically this was also based on information from literature on what is actually the minimum standard level of a river flow which has been already drastically affected by human activity, and for sure this is far from the natural flows.
Okay, thank you, Adriano. I mean, the answered questions are in this tab answered, so please continue the discussion there. And last question, it's a big question, but I guess only short answer is possible, Adriano, if I may ask. So Rafael is asking, you mentioned finding synergies when planning for several SDGs at the same time. What concrete synergies in terms of solutions did you find? How blind was the assessment? I'm not sure I understand here. Consideration of other systems when planning for SDGs separately. I get us two questions. One about specificity, what concrete synergies, and the other one was about the difference between this scenario when the SDGs are not included, synergies are not looked for separately, and when they're included.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most critical synergies that we highlight is the one of hydropower. Which roles it's different when it's just trying to be boosted in order to increase the share of renewables in the power system, while when you also need to prioritize this water allocation for agriculture, it makes a difference. But also the use of irrigation water, efficient water technologies has some synergies in terms of and trade-offs in terms of energy consumption. So increasing the use of, for instance, smart irrigation is actually increasing electricity consumption and cost, and at the same time is also reducing it might reduce the water that then feeds back to groundwater resources, and therefore these are, for instance, critical linkages that having multiple policies together might make more relevant.
Thank you very much.